G'day, it's Oscar, and right now deep into the process of proofreading for the next book, How to Listen. If you'd like to get access early to elements of the book, we've got a couple of bonuses organised as well. You can visit oscartrimboli.com/next book. That's oscartrimboli.com/NEXTBOOK. Next book. If you pop your details in there, you'll get access to a range of resources we've organised for people who want to play along in the journey of creating the most comprehensive book when it comes to listening. Now, in each of the chapters, we explore different aspects of listening. I'm looking here at the table of contents. First is your invitation. Next is why listen. Chapter 2, get ready to listen. Chapter 3, give and pay attention. Next is hear, see, and sense. Chapter 5, explore the backstory, which I'm going to give you a sneak peek into one of the stories in there right now. Thank you for listening to the Deep Listening Podcast. Then in chapter 6, we explore notice how it's said. Next, focus on what is unsaid. And then finally, listen for their meaning. This has been a really significant undertaking with the Deep Listening Ambassador community, and I want to acknowledge all of them who've assisted in this journey as well. What you're about to hear next is the opening part of Chapter 5 around the backstory. I hope you enjoy it. Chapter 5. Explore the backstory. Great listeners influence how speakers tell their story. I discovered the power of being curious and rewinding to the origins of the story firsthand while listening to community organiser Simon Greer. The topic of the interview was Greer's project, Bridging the Gap. This project is about teaching university students the communication skills they need to listen when they fiercely disagree with an idea or a point of view, rather than simply talking back to the other person with their own ideas. This is an important difference I need to remind myself of regularly. My opening question to Simon was this. Simon, we'll spend a bit of time talking about bridging the gap. Before we do you mind taking me back? What was the conversation that sparked the idea to create it?
It's always dangerous when you're asked, like, take me back, because I could go back to, like, my parents came to the United States on a boat. They came from England in 1965. And to really understand me, you have to understand the part of the Jewish left that I grew up in. So I grew up on the Upper West Side in New York City in Manhattan when it was still pretty working class, middle class, heavily Jewish left. I went to a summer camp called Camp Kinderland. And when I say this to people, like, it was a Jewish communist summer camp, they're like, oh, you mean liberal? No, 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 no. No, I mean a Jewish communist summer camp. Like, my bunk was named Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney after the civil rights workers. And the music building was called Paul Robeson. In camp, at least in the US, at summer camp, there's usually like blue versus gray in the Camp Olympics. And at my camp, at Camp Kinderland, the teams were named after countries in anti-colonial struggle. So I was on Vietnam one year and I was on Ivory Coast one year. So, I mean, I really grew up on the left and I learned a huge amount from that. I didn't ever do that well in school, and for many years blamed myself. If I had just applied myself better, if I had just tried harder, if it was a problem with me. I don't think I had a framework to understand that maybe it was a problem with the institution. And when I was in college, I wrote my senior thesis about this place called the Highlander Center in Tennessee, which is a social movement training ground. Martin Luther King was trained there. Rosa Parks was trained there. What's important about it is that the guy who founded it was named Miles Horton, and he he believed in popular adult education. And he was close with Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator who wrote a thing called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In my opening to my thesis in college, when I wrote about Highlander, I quoted a woman I had seen at a workshop there who said, "Highlander learned me good." And what I loved about it was that it wasn't that they taught her, it was that they helped her learn what she knew. It helped her find her wisdom. Caveat, I failed my thesis because they said it was anti-intellectual, which exactly goes to my point about the problem with the institutions. But that aside, after I finished college, through a set of strange opportunities, I went to Poland, which is the country my family had fled and many had perished in a couple generations back. But I went because I had a chance to go work for Solidarity when they became the government. My first job was working in Solidarity's headquarters when Lech Wałęsa was elected and became president of newly freed, newly independent Poland. And I learned a lot of things there. I learned what social movements are like on a mass scale because everybody was in the movement in the revolution. I learned about how hard it is when you win. Like they toppled the Soviet Union, then they had to run an economy and a country, and that's not easy. So as a 21-year-old, I got a dose of, you got to be very serious about what it means to win. What was seared into my heart there was a deep faith in people, that everyday people can do great things. And that's actually probably the only people who can do great things, right? It's not just the smartest person, the most elite person, the most powerful. It's like the electrician and the plumber and the shipyard worker, and that we actually as humans want to do that. We want to be bigger than, like I just tended to my little life here. Like we want to make a mark, but most of us are told we can't. And the way our societies are structured, it's increasingly hard to. So that launched me into a career as a community organizer, as a union organizer.
This backstory creates an entirely different perspective about Greer, the project, and his part in the project. You understand his history, its circumstances. Later, he revealed more of his parents' story. They fled Poland around World War II to arrive in England. After college, this came full circle when Greer took his first job working for Lech Wałęsa and the Polish Solidarity movement. This is the value of the backstory. You and I feel like we know Simon Greer so much better. We understand how he has arrived at working on a project about communicating when you disagree. We understand his past relationships and their influence on his ideas and his point of view when it comes to listening to disagreement. With his backstory revealed, now it's time to build on this foundation and the connection to explore bridging the gap. Now, and only now, could I understand how this project fits into his background and his worldview. Now, not all speakers commence the story at the beginning. Rarely will they outline each scene with all the characters, their parts, into a coherent sequence. When the story's content is close or personal, speakers tend to start the conversation from their opening scene rather than from the opening scene. When speakers explain the history of an issue, a project, relationship, and the connected struggles, they'll rarely explain it fully. They typically describe where they're at in their thinking rather than the events. When they say it for the first time, that's the story in their mind, not the complete story. Yet something powerful and transformational happens when the speaker says the entire story out aloud from the beginning, from the idea's inception. Verbalizing all the components of the story to all the participants creates meaningful connections for the speaker and the listener. It creates shared understanding and meaning. I'm fascinated what you took away from Simon's story. I'm curious how well you listened for the backstory. I'm curious about how much value you place on take me back to when you first noticed this happening. I'm curious if the backstory is often a barrier to making progress in your workplace, because the absence of the backstory is often the first stumbling block to listening effectively. Again, if you'd like to get early access to the materials associated with the book, please let me know. Visit oscartrimboli.com/next book. You can leave your details there and we'll start to provide you with some insights. I'm really grateful you're part of the Deep Listening Ambassador community. The podcast is only one way we help others to listen. I'm Oscar Trimboli and I'm on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world. You've given me the greatest gift of all. You've listened to me. Thanks for listening.